It's SIP episode 90. This week we have Chad Angelo of Angelo Cellars and Jeremy Benson, executive director of Free the Grapes. Battling Mother Nature is only half the problem. Then you have to battle the regulatory requirements to get your wine into any of these states behind me. It's not easy. Grab a glass, sit back, and learn how you can make a difference. Cheers. For those of you that don't know us or that are new, my name is Martin Cody, co-founder of Cellar Angels. And Cellar Angels is a direct-to-consumer company specializing in wines exclusively and only from Napa and Sonoma, limited production wineries, founded the company in 2010 during the time when we actually owned a bricks and mortar retail wine store, and we're kind of frustrated with the lack of choices consumers were presented. And we decided to solve the problem by founding a digital wine company. That was 12 years ago. We're on SIP episode 90, marching towards 100. 100 episodes going to be themed Invite a Friend to SIP episode. So we hope to have 100 people on there. But tonight we've got two extraordinary guests that I'm very, very thrilled to have. And one, some of you may know, Chad Angelo of Angelo Cellars, who called me a bad name earlier because I like to wear a tire. And this is Chad's shirt. He also has his own shirt with the red block logo. And also a special guest that I've read about for years. We've supported for, I think, all 12 years that Cellar Angels has been in existence. And now we finally get to meet the person behind the scenes himself, Jeremy Benson of Free the Grapes. So I'm going to start with Chad. All of you, or many of you, I'm sure, have the red block in your glass, of which I do. And we're going to have Chad talk a little bit about that in a little later on in the segment. But Chad, say hello to the group again, and then kind of give us your origin story from Boeing to Napa Valley.
Oh, hello, everybody. I'm glad to be back. We talked about this. I think this is my fourth SIP, and I was SIP number 1 2 years ago this month. We talked about that earlier. So happy to be here. Yes, I got into wine after, in college in Missouri, where I went to school. And during my Boeing career, I found a way with some friends, to start making wine in Napa, which I am a Napa cab fan. As most of you know, that's mainly what we make, California cabs and blends. So what you have tonight is our newest stuff. We'll talk about that in a little bit later, but happy to be here. We started in 2005 with 1 barrel of wine. And all these years later, through the fires, the earthquakes, the droughts, the fires, the droughts, and all, we're still here, still making wine. We're waiting on the locusts. I got insurance for that.
Yeah, you probably could. I think it's good because your starting point is kind of what I'm sure all of us have had, the fantasy, the dream, the desire. When you sit there and you're out in Napa, which is where Jeremy is coming from. It's a background, but he's actually in Napa. And when you decide to start a winery, you have to navigate some very, very tricky things with regards to, yes, making wine, sourcing wine, but then also getting the wine into the consumer's hands around the country. And that's where Jeremy's organization has been instrumental in making that easier. So Jeremy, please tell the group a little bit about kind of your history and your story and how you came to Free the Grapes and the mission there.
Yeah, great. Good to be with you all. Thanks very much for inviting me, Martin, and good to meet you, Chad, as well. So appreciate the chance to talk about it. So I'm a marketer by trade in the wine and spirits business. And one of the clients that my agency has is Free the Grapes. And so Free the Grapes was founded in 1998. And it was when the industry basically got together after wholesalers had put forward a bill in Florida in 1997 that would make it a felony to ship a bottle of wine to an adult consumer in the state of Florida. And so what happened is that the two groups, what's called the Wine Institute, which is a public policy group out of California, and Napa Valley Vintners Association, which is a trade association of Napa vintners, got together, put together a campaign in Florida to oppose the bill. They were unsuccessful, but what happened is that the consumer response was so strong that they came back and realized that they needed to add a consumer sort of outreach and media component to it. And that was the founding really of Free the Grapes. And so Me and my team were hired to run the marketing campaign for Free the Grapes. And essentially our mission, which hasn't changed, is to bring consumer choice to wineries, to wine across the United States, and to promote the idea of legal, regulated, direct-to-consumer shipping. We're not trying to replace the three-tier system. Three-tier meaning the wine goes from a supplier like Chad through a wholesaler to a retailer or a restaurant. I'm trying to replace it as much as augment it, because that's what consumers want to do. They want to buy wine directly. So that's the history of the founding of the organization. We started in '98 with 17 states that were legal. Now there are 47, but we still got work to do.
Awesome. And I think it's fascinating from a wine romance story. We all have fallen in love with some aspect of wine, certainly the consumption part of it, the beauty of it, the production part of it. But many of us have, from a consumer standpoint, don't recognize the legal side of it, especially in the direct-to-consumer side. Mm-hmm. So historically, when you think about Prohibition, the temperance movement, and then the 21st Amendment, you know, back when the 21st Amendment was signed, I think there was 8 wineries. And the temperance folks or body did not want the producers selling directly to the consumers. So they put in the wholesaler aspect and they said, we need you to go through a middleman. That was probably all well and good when there was 8 wineries. And now, now there's 15,000, you know, nationwide. So it really doesn't work. And it's fascinating that 1997 law in Florida, to make it a felony if you were shipping wine into Florida with jail time. I mean, that's, when you think about now how much we buy on the internet, it's almost unconscionable. It's hard to imagine.
Right.
And I think that probably spurred, I mean, the 2 most famous court cases since then were co-joined in 2005, a decision. It was like 7 years that the Juanita Swedenberg of Virginia, a winery, pistol of a woman, by the way, and we've met several of them on Cellar Angels, whether it's Madame Clicquot, Lily Bollinger, some of these people. She was a direct-to-consumer zealot, and she wanted to have the ability. So she sued the state of New York, basically with the dormant commerce clause that I'm sure Scotland knows all about. But essentially that 21st Amendment has a clause in it that the federal government can regulate states and prevent them from actually putting laws in place that say things similar to what they were trying to say. That California, you can't ship wine to New York, but New York facilities can ship wine out. Well, that's kind of against consumer or businesses in California. So they said, nope, you can't do that. So that was co-joined with a woman that was suing the state of Michigan, because the state of Michigan governor it was actually Jennifer Granholm. She was the one that put this bill into place. And so this is the famous Granholm v. Held decision of 2005. And I remember this decision, and Jeremy, I'm sure you remember it like yesterday, because I think the consumers heralded this as finally, all the walls are coming down. But here, 17 years later, the walls are slowly getting little chinks in the armor. So walk us through the Granholm case to where we are today and why it's so difficult to ship wines from California to any state besides Utah. I don't think they're ever going to allow it.
Oh, we'll get Utah. Just go Wisconsin. Yeah. I mean, just the short version of this, and I'm not an attorney, but it was quite a momentous day. I was actually in the Supreme Court watching the argument on December 7 of 2004, which was pretty fascinating.
Very cool.
But the whole idea was, we had Eleanor Heald, who was a writer in Michigan, and Michigan wineries could ship within state to Michigan consumers, but say a winery in Oregon couldn't ship to Eleanor in Michigan, which was bad for business since she was a wine reviewer. And so, these 2 cases went up to the Supreme Court. And essentially what the court decided was that it was this idea with these states to say that, well, our own wineries can ship to our own consumers, but out-of-state wineries can't ship to those same consumers is against the Commerce Clause. So the ruling in 2005 was an unusual sort of alignment of the justices. But yes, what it didn't necessarily say suddenly that direct shipping was legal across the United States. It required legislative approval and then regulations and promulgating rules that allow wineries to purchase a permit and so forth and pay taxes. And there's a lot of rules that go along with it that the industry, frankly, had already negotiated and agreed to. So fast forward a little bit. And so we had a case where with New York and Michigan, where it was an interstate, intrastate shipment issue as the discriminatory effect. And then, but what we've been up against in other states is, for example, this discrimination based on the production size of the company, of the winery rather. So if a winery in whatever state produces more than 250,000 gallons of wine per year, they can't ship directly to consumers in New Jersey. So we're trying to fix that. We got it fixed in Massachusetts and Arizona, and we're working on New Jersey. We got it fixed in Ohio actually 2 years ago as well. So that got fixed. But if any of your heroes are on from New Jersey, visit our site at freethegrapes.org. This is my plug, Martin. So
no, we already put the link in the chat.
Because this is what we do. So we're in touch with consumers in New Jersey that then go onto our website at freethegrapes.org. They take 2 minutes. They personalize a letter that's there. It gets sent automatically to their legislator. And the legislators hear from consumers, and it's easy to be cynical about this, but the fact is that legislators really do listen to voters. And that's the reason why we've gone from 17 states to 47. So we're working on the other states that have these other, we've got a few states that ban altogether, 3 of them. And then there are other states where we're working on various issues that just curtail consumer choice.
Well, there's a couple comments there. It's interesting to me. And by the way, we've been huge fans at Cellar Angels of Free the Grapes since day one. When we founded the company in 2010, when people would go to check out of the 17 states that weren't available, if it says, if you're looking for any of these states, and it would click on a state, it would go to your website and we'd say, call your congressman. And so thankfully, this map behind us in the last 12 years has changed considerably. Yeah. And you're talking about New Jersey. I feel like one of those weathermen because it's backwards. It looks like LN. You're looking at New Jersey up there. The states that are colored a certain color, or in other words, aren't green, those are the ones that are currently requiring some effort and assistance. But even if it allows direct to consumer shipping, that is, I don't want to say that's half the battle. That's a significant battle, and I'm cynical. So, and I lived in Chicago all my life, so I know a little bit about corrupt politics. This, you don't have a state that has 6 of their last 8 governors in prison. I mean, come on.
And we put them in prison out here for you.
Yeah, exactly. But it doesn't seem at all. I mean, I don't see the state of Michigan coming to the defense of the small independent booksellers when Amazon was doing business there. I don't see the state of New York coming to the defense of, all the independent shoe sales stores and stuff when Zappos is sending shoes by the tens of thousands there. So it does seem a little bit one-sided with how they pick and choose their battles. And I also have always loved the legislation that says we want to prevent underage kids from getting access to wine. Right. I was an underage kid once, and I would never have used the internet to go get, and I wasn't buying wine at 18. So
I always say the joke that kids aren't taking their parents' credit card and buying $100 bottles of cab from Napa and having them shipped to the house.
Right, and then having mom or dad go sign for it. It's a gift for you, mom. I'll watch it.
I bought it for you. Yeah, it's a present.
Those are arguments that have long since been debunked. In fact, that specific one by the Federal Trade Commission and by the Supreme Court. Some of the other ones that we run up against are basically the collection and remittance of the excise and sales taxes, but wineries are able to do that. There are other ones out there, but the loss of state jobs in the Maryland comptroller did a whole study if that was the case, and it actually wasn't the case. So direct-to-consumer shipments it's not a zero-sum game. They're not replacing wines that are being purchased at retail and restaurant. That's what we've seen. And in fact, kind of the opposite. What really happens is that wineries, as they grow, then if they want to grow to that point, that they start on the direct-to-consumer side, they build up an audience, and then in some cases, they build up a big enough audience in a particular market where they actually need to get retail and restaurant distribution at that point. And then it makes sense for them to then talk to a wholesaler to then work with them to get distribution into the retail and restaurant space. So only a few percentage points of wine in terms of volume is actually direct sold, but from a value standpoint, a revenue standpoint, it's significant, and it's very significant. In fact, it's a requirement if you're a small winery, absolutely a requirement to do it. You can't operate a small winery if you're not shipping direct.
No, you'll die. It's not even death by 1,000 paper cuts. It's death by like 4 paper cuts.
Yeah.
But it's funny to me, and I don't know if the audience knows this, because clearing the hurdle of having the state be permissible to ship direct to is only the beginning, because each state then has put in place, I think, intentional obstacles. And Chad, you've got story after story after story, because a small winery, once you get bit by the bug and have the dream and you get the fruit you want and you have the winemaker you want, or you become the winemaker. I mean, this is a journey, really, not a destination. And you have to really be persistent. Then you have to decide what states you may want to sell directly to. And each state has its own requirements from a reporting standpoint, from a documentation standpoint, from an application fee standpoint. So Chad, why don't you highlight 2 stories or so of states that you're trying to get distribution in or direct to consumer wine in, and kind of what your experience has been.
Okay. Yeah, as Martin said, every state is different. They have different laws, different reporting requirements, different fees, requirements, and so forth. Just a couple stories, and I'm not even going to say the name of the states just so I don't get in trouble. If somebody sees this, but one state in particular, some of the generalities and specifics, you have to have a license in every state. And usually they charge you a fee of $25 to $100 per year. So add that up for every state that you do. For a small winery, it becomes very expensive pretty quick. Second of all, you may have to register every label of wine that you're going to ship into that state. And that can be free, or it can be, I think the most I've ever seen is $10 a label, but most of it's like usually $5. But then once you start doing it, that's a different story. I mean, just getting in the door and getting that approved where you can start shipping then becomes the reporting. You may have to, states may require you to collect an excise tax or pay an excise tax for how many bottles or gallons of wine you ship in. You may have to monthly send a report in to the state, for each state that requires it, how much you did sell and who it went to and how much they paid for it and so forth. There's some states that limit how much a winery can ship to a single household in a state in a year. And
Scott and Liz found that out.
Yeah. This particular state that I've dealt with, it is the responsibility of the winery to record that and stop and not ship to that household if somebody would go over the, say, 3-case limit or whatever it is. And if you get caught and the winery didn't do it and they shipped more than that, the winery pays the fee. So this is all becomes a big quagmire for a small winery, let alone a big one. But
well, and the big ones are having challenges too. And Jeremy, I see a question here for you, and I want to highlight Michigan again, because Michigan was a thorn back in 2005, and it's surfaced again. And the word felony has come up in the last 12 months because the governor there has basically said there's way too many illegal bottles coming in, and the Beer and Wholesalers Group of America, or of Michigan rather, has put together a pretty strong defense of why this is bad. You're depriving Michigan wineries of business, that sort of thing. And I mean, there are 60 distributors of wine in the state of Michigan alone. So it seems like there's quite a surplus of that when there's only 140 wineries in Michigan. I find that fascinating, but they are now excluding winery shipments from California unless you are licensed. But I don't know if they have a cap, but Jeremy, you have mentioned that some states impose caps, and I know Nevada is one, even though they're green behind me. So green just means they allow it. You have to kind of click into the state to determine what the specifics are. Is that accurate?
Yeah, exactly. So to answer Rebecca's question here about Nevada, and the fact is that almost every state puts some sort of limit on the amount of wine that can be shipped, typically per winery, per consumer, per year. And those are often between, say, 12 and 24 cases per person, per winery, per person per year. Some cases that's the shipment is unlimited. But the question she's asking, which is a good one, is, are there cases where we're trying to increase that limit? And the answer is yes. We've been working on one actually today. so there's a bill now in Alaska, and Alaska heretofore has had a fairly open shipment statute that says a quote unquote reasonable limit, which is actually undefined, but there's a new bill that would reduce that pretty significantly, that wine industry lobbyists are working on, and we're helping to support them by reaching out to wineries and asking them to get in touch with their consumers that are in Alaska to encourage the legislature to enact a reasonable limit, which would be probably something like 12 to 24 cases in that case. So you're right. Those green states, Martin, behind you are typically they do have some kind of limit to them, and this was something that the industry agreed to years and years ago with a model direct shipping bill. Chad brings up a good point that it is, if you're a small winery, it's like shipping, it's like exporting to 49 other states if you choose to do that. For most part, if you're, say, a 5,000, 10,000 case winery and you're doing that much direct, you're probably not even shipping to all the states that you necessarily could ship to legally anyway, because A, you don't have enough wine, and B, you may not want to ship to Nebraska because the license is $500. So those are some of the obstacles that we're working on as well. And they're just to Martin to add another one, an odd in the category of odd wine laws. In Rhode Island, a consumer has excuse me, has to first visit the winery premises in order to have wine shipped to them. And that's a state that we're working on right now to try and get that changed. I also mentioned the capacity cap issue. That's the one in New Jersey that we're working on now. But that's a capacity cap in terms of like how much wine Chad can produce, or name your winery, how much they produce in total. If they produce over that capacity cap, then they can't ship anything. And that really hurts a lot of small wineries, because I can, something like take St. Michel Wine Estates out of Washington State, which is they have a number of brands. They're well over 250,000 gallons a year. They bought a great winery in Sonoma called Patson Hall. And Patson Hall had to write Dear John letters to all their club members in New Jersey, because now they were owned by a larger company that in aggregate produced over the capacity cap. So that's the kind of stuff that we're really working on trying to overcome. And we've got it fixed in 3 out of 4 states. We just need to get New Jersey, because it's an important state for wine consumers.
See, and I think that's funny, because when you mentioned capacity cap, I was thinking it was capacity cap per consumer on what they could get on an annual basis. And I know
it's a little different than that. Yeah.
Okay. And Texas has the annual case thing as well. And we've spoken to a number of wineries that we can't feature their wines too late in the year, because a lot of their consumers in Texas have already hit their cap.
Right.
So, it's insane, in my opinion. Are these hurdles, obstacles put in place to protect the fiefdom of the distribution channel, or what's the purpose of these?
Yeah, typically it is. It's an attempt to a protectionism, really, more than anything else. And unfortunately, the case is that, and the reality is that it doesn't help anybody, including wholesalers and retailers, to oppose these bills that are reasonable, right, in terms of the amount of wine that can be shipped, that the winery has to purchase a license to ship, that they have to collect and remit excise tax, that they have to be a business entity in order to conduct business in there. Unfortunately, it really curtails the ability of those wineries to grow, who would eventually, or may choose to eventually, grow enough where they need a wholesaler to do distribution in a particular state. And so
Correct.
again, it's not a zero-sum game. We've always seen that. We've always seen that wineries that have a robust direct-to-consumer shipment program in a particular state, their sales through the 3-tier are almost always higher in those states where they have a robust direct-to-consumer program, as opposed to the states where they don't. So
No,
it's a
and
brand
it becomes a feeding system. I mean, when
Yeah,
we owned
yeah,
the
exactly,
store
yeah.
when we owned the store in Chicago, we would introduce small producers to
Yeah.
the distributors because we knew that we'd create a market for it. And I don't know why they didn't see that as, oh, we could have a symbiotic relationship here where the more SKUs I can carry versus the ones that are just 50,000 cases, I can actually drive greater business. Now,
Yeah.
maybe it's a logistics challenge because they'd much rather move 10,000 boxes than, one box 1,000 times. I don't know. There is a question that someone has asked, Brent, these fees that you're referencing, Jeremy, how do they apply to companies like wine.com and some of the larger, online digital wine stores, if you will?
Yeah, were you talking about fees? Did I hear that right?
Yeah, fees like the state application fees to ship in.
Oh, got it. Yeah. Well, it's I don't think there's a single answer to it because it's quite a complicated sort of setup. That so if we have any heroes in our group that are thinking about being a winemaker and having your own brand, get a beverage attorney. That'll really help. It'll save you some money. But yeah, the fees for a retailer, and a lot of these companies actually have retail licenses. That's a different animal than a winery to consumer shipment license.
Correct.
But the states in green that are behind Martin there typically have a requirement that a winery license holder, that is a winery that has a federal basic permit to make wine, then can purchase a permit to direct ship from a state like, Washington or Oregon or New York, or name your state. So they pay this sort of license to get or this fee to get the license. And as Chad was saying, they're often saying $100 a year or something like that, in order to allow them to direct ship, as well as that they abide by various laws. And the attorney in the group will probably appreciate the fact that one of the requirements is that when they sign those licenses, that the winery actually consents to the jurisdiction of the state in which the wine is being shipped, not just their own home state, but where it's being shipped.
Right, not where it was produced.
Yeah.
Well, and you bring up a good point. From a retailer perspective, there's a whole different set of guidelines and legal requirements and stuff and Cellar Angels, by design, this is where we set it up in 2010. We never wanted to take title of the material. The winery is always the seller and shipper of record. So we're just kind of a connector, a curator of fine wines. Right. And by the way, it's a good opportunity now to talk a little bit about Chad's wine and how many of you are drinking it. And many of you are not. Here's how you remedy that in the coming sip episodes. Navigate over to the Cellar Angels website and you will see a sip kit right here. And I can tell by this sip kit that there are some doozies coming up, because this is a Blue Rock, Tamber Bay, Stephanie Trotter, and Nick Goldschmidt is going to be featuring in Scotland later in April, which was when we opened up 2 bottles of wine, and we named it after him because that's what he and Lily call Monday. But this is where you can get the sip kit. Tonight, we're drinking Chad Angelo's Red Block. Now, many of you met and know Chad from his flagship Cabernet in the gorgeous silkscreen bottles of Stagecoach fruit. We're going to talk a little bit about that later on. But Chad, break down the Red Block for us.
Okay, Red Block is a new label for us. If you were on last week, the Vizelays talked about a second label or a different label from their main. So this is kind of ours. I had clients that were wanting red wine that wasn't a cult cab or a big cab out of Napa. So this was my attempt at doing that for them. So I went to my Bordeaux style background that I like, and we decided that the Merlot and the cab working together is what we wanted. The reason we put this together was that the Merlot will soften the cab a little bit and add the fruit component of the Merlot that a lot of Bordeaux people like. So what we did was we're basically doing about 50-50. It'll change from year to year, but basically 50-50 Cab Merlot in the red black. And we're bringing the acidity and the tannins down a little bit, introducing the Merlot in there to work with the Cab fruit and be a little easier to drink. We have a lot of people. This is the 17 that we're drinking tonight. First year we did it was 16. It's all gone. 17 is what we're on. We bottled 3 more, I believe, in the warehouse into the bottles. So this is really starting to hit its peak right now. It's melding together, but you can drink this by itself, and that's what a lot of our clients wanted. They wanted something red wine that wasn't Pinot that they could drink by itself, and that's where this came from and why we're doing it. We wanted a second brand because it's not the Cab that the Angelo Cellars silkscreen bottles are, and this is a little bit of a different type of wine, a little different targeted audience, and a different price point, of course.
I was just going to touch upon the price point because $50 is kind of a magical plateau, and maybe we psychosomatically put that in because you can throw a rock in Napa and hit $100 Cab producer, but it's very, very difficult to find a tasting $100 wine at the $50 price point. That's what we do. But this $50 bottle of wine is awesome at that price point because I love the Cab. I love the Merlot. It has a softness. It still is fruit forward, but it is silky. It's very tightly integrated tannins. And for 17, like you said earlier, it's drinking fantastic. I believe there's a question from Jim. Do I have that?
I don't.
Oh, who has his hand up?
Allow him to talk.
Well, let me do 2 poll questions and then we'll turn on cameras if anybody wants to. Chad, it was revealed that you would like to produce about 4,000 cases and host private tastings in Napa at your winery. Don't answer this yet. True or false, studio audience? Studio audience. True or false, family room audience? Camper audience. That's right. Jeff and Jane are on their 12,000-mile excursion around the country, and we're coming live via Camper Cam. All right, 5, 4, 3. Oh, and by the way, Susan, hello. Sean, hello. I said hello to Scott. Mark, I think I didn't say hello to you. Lauren, Christine, hello. Chad?
Oh, pretty even.
What's the answer?
4,000 cases would be a little high, but I would do private tastings when I'm in town, but
So no desire for a physical structure?
we lease a winery right now, and this is also goes back to some of the stuff we were talking about. In Napa, you actually have a license that has multiple things on it, and in Napa, it limits the license for you to make wine, limits how much you can make per year by gallons. And the second part of the license is whether there's a tasting room allowed to be at your winery, and it limits how many people per week can come to your winery.
Oh, yeah.
My winery that I lease, and that's what we use their license, has a whopping 6 people per week on the license.
Well, and it's funny because this is exactly why we were helping the last several years, Save the Family Farms and the micro wine ordinance to have these folks be able to at least get some foot traffic within the parameters. So happy to see that that's coming, but I'm glad you're not going to be making 4,000 cases. Yeah. All right, Jeremy, this next question is for you and the audience. The best way to support Free the Grapes is to call your congressperson and share your voice, financial contributions, boycott BIB, not big, BIB. I have no idea, that's a typo. Big box retailers and purchase as much wine DTC as possible. All of the above. So don't answer that yet. We've got about, a lot of folks all over the board. Apparently no one thinks it's BIB. All right. Scott, to everyone, why is there so many tasting rooms in towns in Napa and California that feature several vineyards? I'll give that one to Chad in 1 second, Chad. So Jeremy, what is the best way? Because apparently people think it's all the above.
Actually, the best way is to either call your state legislator if you're in one of those states that prohibits winery to consumer shipping, or another option is simply to, this is another plug, Martin, if you don't mind. So simply go to our website and sign up for our email list, because what happens is that if you're in a state that has some sort of pending legislation where we need your help, or we need a few minutes for you to, write directly to your legislator, then we're going to send you an email, or you can follow us on Facebook. Same thing. Those are the two ways. It's really email and Facebook are the main ways that we communicate with consumers, and we're not going to bug you unless there's something that is important that we need some help on.
And I mean, the Facebook page is simple. When you say call your congressperson, is that is it the state senator? Like if you're in New Jersey, are you calling your state senator? Or
Yeah,
are you calling?
Yeah, exactly. So these are, because as you, I think wisely pointed out, that a lot of these rules are based on prohibition, where essentially the trade-off was that the states were allowed to then manage their own importation and sale of wine, beer, and spirits. Then this is done at the state level, not the federal level. So our actions in places like Rhode Island and Alaska, like I mentioned, New Jersey, Delaware, those are all at the state level. And so, yeah, it's state representatives that are the ones that are considering these bills, these improvements, and in some cases, looking at maybe rescinding some of these laws. There's never been a state that's rescinded their direct shipping rule based on any sort of non-compliance. So we haven't run into that issue. It has more to do with some of the hurdles that we've talked about: capacity caps, low,
Right.
high license fees, visit penalties, those sorts of things that we're trying to overcome.
And Chad, on the two questions for you. The first question is, if you're only allowed to have 6 people per week, is it even financially economical to have 6 people per week? That unless everyone's buying cases of wine, that seems like a money loser.
No, it isn't. There's requirements too of what a tasting room is. And I see Scott had a question about the tasting room towns in Napa, and that's where a lot of small wineries go, is that also a winery can only have one tasting room. They can only be represented at a single tasting room in California. So when you do something like that, there's several that I know of downtown because I have friends that own them and so forth, like the Wine Thief and Vintners Collective. And essentially they are they change the address for the tasting room for their winery to the Wine Thief or Vintners Collective. And then that becomes a business, that becomes their tasting room per their license. But then the collective or Wine Thief or whatever has whatever rules that they represent to sell your wine for you, essentially.
Right. And there's and those, understandably so, those co-ops are popping up seemingly in Napa, St. Helena, all Calistoga, and it makes sense if 4, 5, 6 wineries get together, because it's so hard to do it on your own and so expensive to do it on your own. Get 4 or 5 wineries in a space.
Well, if you're only making 600 cases of wine anyway, to have a tasting room, I mean, that's a small storage shed. It's not doing much. But if you put 10 or 12 of those together, you have the opportunity to economies of scale and get people in there. And one of the advantages is that you can do one-stop shopping. You couldn't go to 12 wineries in 2 or 3 days in Napa.
Oh, hold my beer.
It'd take you forever. So you can go in one-stop shopping. And the other thing is they can kind of guide you through the style of wines you like and target you. And you can taste 4 or 5 different wineries at once and compare them side by side.
That's a good point. The comparison piece is important. And it's funny. I think everyone has been to the Napa experience where there are 4 or 5 deep at a tasting room bar type thing. And it's might be enjoyable once, but you don't get the attention. And so that's why we always insist upon and provide, luxury elevated tasting experiences where you're meeting with the winemaker or sitting off to the side somewhere, or if it's a private tasting, where you can have that intimate experience in literally Jeremy's backyard there with, among the vines. And you're not going to get that at a tasting room that is 4 or 5 deep. And you're going to see other people joining now as Mission Control updates and lets people with cameras become panelists and see everyone. I'm going to ask Jeremy the question with regards to, we saw an uptick in volume via the pandemic. How did the pandemic shine a light on what you're doing, and were you able to leverage anything good out of it?
Yeah, absolutely. It's obviously it was and continues to be a terrible thing. What from a purely consumer, wine choice perspective, in those states that didn't allow or restricted direct-to-consumer shipping in some sort of excessive way, then we were able in many states to make the argument to say, look, this is if consumers are restricted in terms of their travel, they're restricted in terms of where they can shop and when and so forth, and how interested they are in going out and visiting and going in the public, how comfortable they are with that. Direct-to-consumer shipping, which has proven successful for consumers, wineries, regulators, tax collectors, why not include that in as a result of COVID as well? So we use that argument in New Jersey specifically, and we actually got a vote on a bill. I bring this up. This is the capacity cap issue that bans wineries that are over that production capacity to direct ship. And we actually did get a positive committee vote on a bill, which is hopefully leading into some more positive developments in this next session or section rather. There's a question from Don just about the capacity or the case limits for shipments to Minnesota at 2 cases. Yes, that is low. That's very low. And so I know
have they been to Minnesota? It is cold up there. They are going to need a little bit larger cap.
They need some of Chad's wine here. I think the red block will go well. So yeah, absolutely. That's been a part of what especially the industry lobbyists at public policy groups like Wine Institute have been aiming to try and improve. Like I said, same thing in Alaska. We're trying to prevent a real restriction in the amount of wine that can be shipped.
Impressive. And Scotland, in addition to being a great angel, Scotland and I have another thing in common. Both of our college alma maters got to the tournament and are now going home. So that was a fun day yesterday. So brutal. My team had not been there in 9 years, and so that was a quick exit. Jeremy, on the licensing and aspect, or actually, I'm going to throw this one to Chad. Chad, each state has different sales taxes and excise taxes and use taxes that you have to report?
Yes, potentially, yeah. Not all of them, but some do. And they're reported differently. One state may be monthly, one may be quarterly, one may be yearly. It's all crazy. So something we talked about earlier when we met earlier this week was that businesses have cropped up to help wineries do this. So actually, I subcontract my licensing and reporting and paying of excise tax and all that stuff to a separate company. And what it essentially is people within the wine industry that learned all this when it was ballooning and growing over the last 17 years or whatever, they went out on their own and are doing consulting, and they do that for us because it's very time consuming and tracking. If you have all 47 licenses for the states you can ship to, they're all different. They got to keep track of when you ship, when they report, when you pay, when your license is up, when you got to renew, when your new wines are coming out, when you're going to start shipping those and all that. And I just hand that off to them to do that for us because I can't do it.
And it used to be, and I'll say this probably 5 years ago, to where it didn't seem to have the scrutiny or spotlight on it from the small winery would say, you know what, I don't have a license there. I'm going to take my chances. California ABC, they've got a staff of 6. The money that they're going to get from me on, whatever fine it's going to be it's going to be less than what it's going to cost them to come after me. Now, fast forward to where we are today. And there was a Napa winery recently, and we mentioned the state of Michigan earlier on how they are cracking down and have sent out cease and desist letters, and they will pull the bill of lading and shipping slip from the common carrier. So they will go to UPS, they will go to FedEx, and they will say, I want to see your shipping manifest for this company or for these shipments. And a winery in Napa, I won't say them by name, but they have a castle. They recently got fined. Oh no, not fined, but they had sent in like 340 orders after they received the cease and desist letter. So it's not, the big guys doing things inappropriately make it so much harder for the small guys doing things appropriately. Yeah. And it's very frustrating. So all of us that have had this dream, we're going to consult with Scotland. We're going to hire Jeremy. We're going to open up our own winery. We may not have a tasting room, but we have to figure this out. So it's easier for the small wineries to get this product into your hands. Anybody have any questions to Jeremy or Chad before I show you Google Earth? It's so easy. Oh, Jeff. Oh no, Jeff's dancing. Jeff has a Google Earth DNA. All right. So for those of you that are new, this is the part of the program where I share with you why we focus on where we focus. And first of all, wine region, as I mentioned at the top of the show, for Cellar Angels is exclusively Napa and Sonoma. And we know it very, very well. And even having lived in Chicago up until very recently, we'd go out to wine country 3 or 4 times a year for the last 20 years, have built up incredible relations with just amazing people, winery owners, winemakers, cellar rats. And it's just a magical, magical place to us spiritually, soulfully. It's just a wonderful place. But from a regional standpoint, here's Napa and here's Sonoma County. And those of you that have been on a long time, the maritime influence here. You've got the San Pablo Bay, you've got the Pacific Ocean, you have rivers everywhere on both sides of the valley. You have unbelievable geological, volcanic shifts of the substructure, the soils, the minerality, the rock. It's an amazing tapestry with which to craft and produce wine. The Mediterranean climate doesn't hurt. Only 3% of the world has a Mediterranean climate. Napa and Sonoma County happen to be part of that 3%, which is incredibly unusual. There's a high percentage of it, obviously, are the bordering countries of the Mediterranean. But it's kind of neat that this has a fairly consistent and predictable weather pattern on an annual basis. Within a block of time when you're going to get your rain, when you're going to get your cold weather, and it's fairly consistent, as I said, until recently. Mother Earth seems to be a little bit upset with the way we've been treating her for the past 50 to 75 years and is rebelling in a certain way. But the flagship wine that Chad produces is from a pretty famous place called Stagecoach. And interestingly enough, this property was acquired in 2017 by Gallo. And it is a huge property. I think it's somewhere in the vicinity of 600 acres with 400 some odd acres under vine. And Chad can check my...
1,200 acres. 1,200 acres.
1,200 total acres. And this is this beautiful tapestry right here. And when you see, it's off the valley floor, and you can actually see the relief quite vividly on how it just sits on top of this mountaintop. And last time we had Chad on, he was losing access to this fruit because of the contracts were being run out and Gallo was not extending them. But Chad has some good news.
Yes. Luckily, we entered into some negotiations with Gallo and we have signed a multi-year contract again with Gallo to source from Stagecoach going forward. So we will, for the next few years, at least have Stagecoach again. Happy to say.
Very happy to say too. I mean, it is, if you ever get a chance to walk up here, it's a pretty special place. I love this area of the valley. The story behind Stagecoach is amazing. What's interesting about Chad's flagship wine that is still going to be sourcing fruit from Stagecoach is because of the arrangement with the Gallo organization, Chad can't put Stagecoach on the label. So we're coming up with an acronym of some sort of clue to let you know. No, we probably can't do that either.
Horse-drawn carriage.
Yeah, sourced from horse-drawn carriage acreage. Exactly. I'm a big fan of that. Chad, on the red block, any food pairings that would be amazing?
Well, being Italian, I love it. I put this in my red sauce. It's fantastic. What doesn't go in the red sauce goes into the stomach. I like grilled foods with this. Anything off the barbecue. I think the char kind of rustic, and I think this has a little bit of elegance. So you get the yin and yang of that. Of course, any red pasta dish, I think it does really well with it too.
And then Jeremy, next up for you beyond New Jersey, is it like when all 50 states are green, do you just go, I'm out of here?
Pretty much. I'm trying to work myself out of a client. Yeah. And, it's been an exercise in perseverance and patience, to be sure. There's been so many cases where we get so close and then the bill doesn't go through for a reason that may be out of anyone's control. But yeah, so like I mentioned, I mean, we're working on New Jersey. It's a 2-year session. We're working on Delaware to open Delaware up because it's one of the 3 states that's remaining. The industry has introduced bills in Mississippi and Utah. Those are the other ones that the other two of the other 3 that are entirely closed down. But then there's a lot of, I mean, the shift has been in the last, say, 10, 15 years from necessarily opening states to making the regulations less onerous for people like Chad, that where the reporting is quarterly or annual rather than monthly, where the licenses aren't $500, they're $100, where the capacity cap issue isn't there, where Rhode Island's winery visitation penalty is what we call it, isn't there. In Louisiana, you can't sell wine if it's also represented by a local wholesaler. There's things like that that are keeping us busy for the next several years. So we still got work to do, but I mean, we've really come a long way in it's so gratifying, to hear stories like Chad's, frankly, of people that had a passion for, viticulture and for winemaking, and were able to get into the business and degree and sell it to, directly to people like you. It makes for such a much more diverse industry across the US. There's at least one winery in every state in the US. So that diversity is really, I think, where a lot of the strength is in the American wine industry.
Brent, I'm actually horrified now with your backdrop. So that is scaring the heck out of me. But I love that you just said what you just said, Jeremy, because I was thinking, well, if he works himself out of a job, there are still a lot of tiers in these states that have some onerous requirements, even though they're green. And how do we get those lessened? And I do think you're right. The public onslaught, when they know some of these things, like they did in '97 in the state of Florida, and said, no. I think if the calls start flooding in, I mean, this is consumer choice, and the consumers aren't getting a fair choice of what they have access to. And it's being restricted by quite honestly, in my opinion, 5 distributors that control 85% of the wine distribution in the United States. So you've got 5 big boys that have been doing this for a long, long time, and they don't want to have this alleged cut in margin of some sort, when in fact, it could actually raise the tide for all boats, and they would benefit from this. So financial contributions and calling our congressman. This is how we have to help free the grapes, and definitely sign up on. Go ahead.
Yeah. We don't need the financial contributions. What we do is our money comes entirely for the effort from wineries, and we have a trade conference each year that funds almost 100% of our actual ongoing revenue. So it's a low cost endeavor, for the agency, given the fact that it's now a $4 billion sales channel for the industry. So it works well. So we don't need money. We just need support. We need those consumers, those voters, locally, because like I said, it's easy to be cynical about it, but the legislators really do listen to, consumers and they have on this issue. It may take a while, but they really have on this issue.
No, that's incredibly important. I've been remiss at calling our local folks, so I will definitely get back on it and start participating more on the Facebook page. I want to raise a glass to Chad and Jeremy for spending some time with us and hopefully educating some folks on the legal nightmare that is beyond the dream of creating wine, but selling wine into the market. Next week, SIP is off, so come visit us in 2 weeks for episode 91. We will see you on April 1st. No fooling is what it says here on my cue cards. So that was Missions Control. She is the comedian this evening. Can't do this without you. And you heard Jeremy talk about heroes, and you guys all know you are the heroes of the wine industry. And this day and age, we need a lot more heroes based upon what's going on in the world. So thank you all for being heroes to the folks like Chad and helping the small limited production wineries do what they do so we can enjoy it together. Be good to one another, stay safe, and we will see you in 2 weeks, everyone. Have a great night. Cheers.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you all. Cheers.